Chapter 8. Dangerous Curves. Busby Berkeley was the undisputed genius numero uno of the Hollywood musical. He is the only Hollywood director whose name is a dictionary entry. He had the boldest imagination in the history of Tinseltown. Before his arrival on the movie scene, musicals were stage-bound. Berkeley ripped away the proscenium arch, whatever the word is. He sent his camera up to the roof, sometimes through the roof, then craned it down to within an inch of a beautiful girl's eyeball. His numbers did away with time and space. They became more than song and dance routines. He made surrealistic, voyeuristic, erotic musical dream fantasies which made eyes pop and pricks stand up around the world. He saved Warner Brothers from bankruptcy during the Depression and turned the geometry of girls' legs into art. Yet, this great original talent was also a mama's boy and a bit of a monster. He was a neurotic alcoholic who killed 3 persons with his roadster and later slashed his throat and wrists in a bloody suicide attempt. Although he married 5 times, one wife was Myrna Kennedy, Chaplin's leading lady in The Circus. She can also be seen in Buzz's Wonder Bar. The big lady in his life was Gertrude Berkeley Mama. Well, Gertrude Berkeley, which was his mom. Ma and Buzz were closer than Hamlet and his Gertrude. His mother was a stage and screen actress who appeared for many years in plays and films with her close friend, the legendary lesbian Alla Nazimova, who had worked with Stanislavski. Buzz made his stage debut as a child in a production of A Doll's House, in which his mother was appearing with Nazimova. In 1914, he was graduated from the Mohegan Lake Military Academy. During World War I, he directed parade drills in France. This work influenced his later feats in Hollywood, where he presided over armies of scantily clad chorines and combined the skills of choreographer and drill master. In 1923, Berkeley scored his first success on stage in the role of Madame Lucy as an effeminate fashion designer in the musical Irene, opposite Irene Dunne. During the 1920s, he became known as one of Broadway's top dance directors. The man who was later to become the greatest choreographer in history of motion pictures never had a day of formal choreographic training. In 1930, he was brought to Hollywood by Sam Goldwyn to do the dance numbers for the screen version of Whoopee, starring Eddie Cantor, produced by Flo Ziegfeld. Among the first girls Buzz chose for the movie were Betty Grable, Virginia Bruce, and Claire Dodd. Beebe had a great eye for female talent, and he also gave Paulette Goddard, Veronica Lake, and Lucille Ball their first important breaks. In Roman Scandals, made for Goldwyn in 1933, he concocted a lascivious human bondage number with completely nude girls. They were only wearing long chains and blonde wigs which fell down to their snatches. When Darryl Zanuck asked Buzz to create the musical sequence of 42nd Street at Warner Brothers, the studio was deeply in the red. 42nd Street, a landmark film, proved such a triumph that it saved the studio from bankruptcy. Buzz shot to fame and glory. His career moved into high gear, with one Baffa musical after another. He did not direct his first complete musical, Numbers and Plot, until Gold Diggers of 1935, and later directed a number of non-musical films, the best of which is They Made Me a Criminal. But he is also indisputably the auteur of all the films he has directed. No one goes to see Flying High because it was directed by Charles Reisner. No one goes to see Dames because of the plot. During all his peak years, Gertrude was his mentor and his solace. He installed his mother in royal splendor in a Beverly Hills mansion where she could indulge her antique collecting mania. Buzz's attraction to violence and his ambiguous attitude to women are evident in his dance numbers in 42nd Street. There is a shooting and a stabbing during a production number. In his masterpiece, it was his favorite sequence of all his dance numbers, The Lullaby of Broadway in Gold Diggers of 1935, the heroine, Winnie Shaw, falls from a skyscraper, screaming as she twirls down to her death. During the tango in Wonder Bar, Dolores Del Rio stabs Ricardo Cortez. And in a kinky dance scene in Small Town Girl, Ann Miller dances among a few dozen disembodied men's arms. His numbers obviously have more to do with his own inner fantasies than they do with the plots of the movie. At the height of his success, violence and tragedy appeared in his real life. On September 8, 1935, Buzz attended a party given by William Koenig, a production manager at Warner's, to celebrate the rap of In Caliente. By the time he left the party, he had certainly had one for the road, and one too many. In addition to the booze, Buzz was suffering from nervous exhaustion. He worked on 5 movies that year, and the brothers Warner were hard taskmasters. As he speeded down the dark and twisting Pacific Coast Highway towards Santa Monica Canyon, he lost control of his white roadster and careened into the path of oncoming traffic. He was driving on the wrong side of the highway when he hit one car, then smashed into another one. 3 of the occupants of the second car were killed: William von Bryson, his mother Ada von Bryson, and his sister-in-law Dorothy Daly. Buzz was charged with second-degree murder. For Warners, this was secondary to the fact that their successful director was locked into a non-stop shooting schedule. 3 films in a row, 2 of which he was to direct in their entirety. Since he was obliged to appear in court during the day, the studio would change the schedule so the films can be shot at night, even though he had suffered head and leg injuries in the accident. To hell with Buzz's shut-eye and mental and physical health. The defendant was brought into court on a wheeled stretcher. Warners had hired Jerry Geisler, there he is, to defend their star director. Geisler, the lawyer of the stars, he pleaded for Chaplin, Errol Flynn, Robert Mitchum, Pantages. Oh, somebody told me how to pronounce this, and I totally forgot. Pantages. Thank you. There we go. So he helped Pantages out. Thank you for whoever told me to fix that. Managed to confuse the jury by exhibiting the blown-out left front tire of Buzz's car. He claimed it was the cause of the accident. Several personalities who had been guests at the party, Frank McHugh, Pat O'Brien, Glenda Farrell, Mervyn LeRoy, all of them under contract to Warner's, testified that Buzz had not been blotto when he left the festivities. The first trial resulted in a deadlocked hung jury. A second trial ended in a 7-5 vote for acquittal. A third trial took place in September 1936. At this one, Geisler got his client off. During these trials and tribulations, Buzz was building up for a nervous breakdown. Up all night manufacturing movie madness, he would work until the wee hours on a Dick Powell sequence for Stage Struck and have to appear to court at 9 a.m. for his murder charge. Later he commented, "Even though I was found innocent, it was a shocking and depressing thing to have been involved in the death of 3 people. I was lucky that I had so much work. It probably saved my sanity." Berkeley was later involved in a brouhaha over the affections of blonde and bouncy sexpot Carol Landis. They had met when he selected her to appear in the chorus of Varsity's show at Warner's, and gave her, as he had given so many other girls, her first break in pictures. He later pulled strings to get her a contract. In 1938, Landis's spouse, Irving Wheeler, sued Buzz for $250,000, claiming that he had wheedled Carol's affections from him. The suit was thrown out of court. Her affections did not have to be wheedled very hard by anybody. At Fox, she later became known as the studio hooker, quote-unquote. She was the most constant visitor in attendance in the back room of Darryl Zanuck's office, servicing the potent mogul who regularly balled a female studio employee at 4 p.m. every working day. Oh my God. Buzz's mother died of cancer in June 1946 after a long and expensive illness. His beloved Queen Gertrude was gone. She who had been his pillar of strength. His long overdue breakdown finally caught up with him. He had a drinking problem. His career was in shambles. He had recently been divorced again. In 1943, he had directed one of his greatest films, The Gang's All Here, a delirious, wildly imaginative musical with Carmen Miranda. It was followed by the so-so Cinderella Jones. At the time of his ma's death, he had not made a movie in over 2 years. He accepted an assignment to stage a Broadway musical, Glad to See You, starring Lupe Velez. His luck continued bad. The show never got to Broadway. After negative notices, it folded in Philly. Buzz slashed his throat and wrist a few weeks after Gertrude died. His Japanese houseboy, Frankie Honda, oh jeez, found him lying in a pool of blood on the bathroom tiles. I don't mean to make fun of the guy while I'm reading this gruesome scene, but it's just that was funny. Frankie tore up a sheet and bandaged up the boss. When he recovered from surgery, Buzz stated, quote, "I'm a has-been and I know it. I can't seem to get myself straightened out for any length of time. Each time I get married, it seems to turn out wrong. I'm broke. When my mother died, everything seemed to go with her." He was later admitted to the psychiatric ward of Los Angeles General. This was his description of that snake pit. Quote, "Oh, it was a nightmare. I was thrown in with dirty, disheveled, bedraggled creatures. They were so short of space, my cot was placed in the corridor where these horrible characters passed me day and night, and I knew that if I wasn't already mad, I soon would be." End quote. He spent weeks there. During that time, his weight dropped from 170 to 107 pounds. He found out he had $650 to his name. In 1948, his old boss, Jack Warner, hired him to supervise the musical numbers on Doris Day's Romance on the High Seas. It was a slow trip back up again, especially since Buzz's big enemy at this point was the bottle. In 1948, he convinced Arthur Freed to let him direct again at MGM. The result was the delightful Take Me Out to the Ball Game, starring Frank Sinatra and Gene Kelly. Well, that's a dynamic duo. Buzz had lost none of his directorial ability. It was, however, to be his last film as a director. He worked on 8 more pictures, creating and directing only the musical numbers. They included some of his best: the water ballets in $1 Million Mermaid and Easy to Love, the nutty Totem Tom Tom sequence in Rose Marie, and the aerial trapeze ballet in Jumbo. Jumbo, Buzz's last movie, was made in 1962. He died in 1976, but his final years were not shadowed by oblivion. Major retrospectives of his films were screened at the Cinémathèque Française in Paris and at the New York Cultural Center. Several books on his work were published. He was in demand for interviews and for speaking tours of college campuses. A whole new generation had become acquainted with his work through television. He became an entry in slang dictionaries. A Busby, turn the page, a Busby Berkeley is, of course, quote, a very elaborate musical number, end quote. Well, that's pretty cool. That's a nice legacy for the guy. The high point of Buzz's resurgence arrived in 1970 when the producers of a revival of No No Nanette hired him as supervising producer of the show, which starred Ruby Keeler, star of several of his greatest films at Warner's during the 1930s. At 75, he was back in business auditioning Corines, whatever that word. I've never seen this word before. I assume it's related to choir and stuff. Auditioning Corines, looking at 350 pairs of girls' gams in order to select a chorus line of 22. The show was a great hit. The opening night of No No Nanette, January 1971, Busby Berkeley was again receiving a standing ovation. And that is the end of Chapter 8, and thank y'all for sticking with me. I'm trying to pop these out when I can, when I have the time and energy, and I appreciate it. The good news is we've still got plenty of the book to go. Thank you again.